Alrighty, so let me get rid of this thing over here. So, coming out of the amazing success of the 1893 World Expo, you've got some ideas that really are going to form the foundation of what we're going to be talking about here. All right. So, let's start with looking at this picture. It's a primary source that we're looking at here. This is an issue of a magazine called Judge from 1899. And in the picture, we have President of the United States, William McKinley, dressed in an American bathing suit. Yes, that's a bathing suit for men back in the day. He is at the Potomac River, and he is in his hand is a savage, uncivilized demon child. And McKinley has a giant brush, and he is using the brush to clean the child in the waters of civilization. And the title of the magazine is The Filipino's First Bath. So and in the background here, you see these two kind of scary troglodyte looking things putting on red, white, and blue pajama pants and stuff. That this one you can't really see here well, but it says Cuba, and this one says Puerto Rico. So the gist of this magazine cover is that the United States is taking upon itself the job, excuse me, of civilizing and somehow making modern and cultured different groups of people. So, coming out of the 1893 World's Fair, you have three ideas that really feed into this. The first and most important one is this idea of American exceptionalism, that America is a different place, that America is a place that is special, that it's set aside, and that it has something about it that it's a quality that nobody else has, that it makes America different and better than anybody else. The second one is consumerism. The idea that America is driven by, as a society, with the need to consume, that we eat, we drink, we spend money, we involve ourselves in activities that use up other things and resources, and that result in us using or taking other things. The third idea is America being obsessed with amusement and entertainment. Now, how do these things fit into what we're going to be talking about? Well, this part 2 of Unit 3 talks about the American Empire. And it's really important to understand that these three concepts, this idea of exceptionalism, the idea that we are a consumer-based culture, and that we are a culture obsessed with leisure and amusement, really feed into a lot of what happens after the 1893 World Expo. And to start with, let's look at the election of 1896. So coming out of the Expo, we ran into the Panic of 1893 at the beginning of the Expo. The panic is in full swing by 1894. The country is in bad shape economically. If you guys remember from the previous unit, President Grover Cleveland found himself in an unenviable situation where all of a sudden he's getting himself involved in the issue of the takeover of Hawaii. He also somehow or another interjects himself into a conflict between England and Venezuela over the border of British Guiana that almost results in a war, and the U.S. reasserting its rights under the Monroe Doctrine. All of these things lead into the election of 1896. Now, of the two political parties, the Republicans in 1896 are the party that knows what it wants. The Republican nominee is William McKinley. William McKinley is an Ohio senator, author of the McKinley Tariff, at the time the highest U.S. tariff ever. The man who picks William McKinley is this Pillsbury Doughboy looking guy, Mark Hanna. Okay. Mark Hanna was an Ohio businessman, and he was basically the big boss man of the Republican Party. Now, if you follow along, you had Rutherford B. Hayes, you had James Garfield, you had Benjamin Harrison, all from Ohio. Now you have William McKinley, also from Ohio. This is not a coincidence. Mark Hanna picks people that will benefit him and his home state. The Republican platform is fairly straightforward. It's all about American prosperity and money and business. The Republicans are behind the gold standard for a strong financial situation. The Republicans want high protective tariffs to protect U.S. businesses. The Republicans are in favor of expansion, which means that Hawaii and the Caribbean, as well as a Central American canal, would be things that would help American business interests. Sugar, more sugar, and an easy way to get from the two oceans to each other for easier access in business. And the protecting of American business interests by moving our Navy from one part of the world to another. At the same time, oddly enough, while the Republicans are in favor of America getting bigger and taking stuff, the Republicans also support revolutions against old European empires. Particularly, there's two of them, one of which will have a very significant impact now. The other one is a significant impact down the road. The first of these is an obscure revolution going on in the Euro-Asian nation of Armenia. Armenia is one of those random countries in far Eastern Europe that's kind of on the border with Asia. They are in a revolt for their freedom against the Ottoman Empire, the modern nation of Turkey. The U.S. is all for the Armenian revolt. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because we see it as a potential new business partner and a place to sell stuff. Number two, we're Americans. We're all about the freedom and the liberty. Number three, the Armenians are Orthodox Christians. The Ottoman Turks are Muslims. And the U.S. sees it very much as a religious struggle between the two, which, by the way, as much as they don't want to admit it, both sides in this conflict may say that would be the same thing. There's also the other revolution going on in Europe, and this one is a bit more close to home and a bit more important for us. It's a revolt on the island of Cuba against the Spanish. And we'll talk more in detail about that, but the Americans are firmly behind the Cubans in this one. The Republicans keep pushing for women's rights, specifically voting, and the furthering of equality and civil rights for Black America, because Black America votes Republican, and they need to be supported. Now, this last one is a little bit weird, but it actually does tie directly into the whole business money thing again. That is the Republican Party's official support for an arbitration board for labor. Arbitration is a process where you have a neutral referee who decides between two different groups that can't get along with each other. So in this particular case, when striking workers and businesses are going against each other, the government and what the Republicans propose is that there is an independent referee from the government who will step in and help them to fix their problem. This is largely because William McKinley got support from organized labor when he was an attorney in Cleveland and actually represented skilled workers against businesses and won. So it creates a really weird situation where the better paid workers, the higher paid union members, the upper middle class workers are all Republicans. The lower class workers tend to vote Democrat. Now, there is the issue of the other party, the Democrats, who in 1896 are a complete train wreck. So the real problem is the Democrats as a party are divided. Now, if you remember, going back a little bit, Grover Cleveland, in the Panic of 1893, brought on by the disastrous decision by the Republican President Benjamin Harrison to make gold and silver essentially the same value, and then couldn't figure out why people cashed in their silver and bought gold with it. Rather than make a bimetallic standard, which is what his party wanted, Cleveland supported the gold standard, and he went to J.P. Morgan. He got gold from Morgan's banks, and he bailed out the U.S. economy that way. And this did not sit well with a lot of the other Democrats. So by 1896, the Democratic Party is divided into two groups. Northern and Eastern Democrats are primarily conservatives. They want the gold standard. Western and Southern Democrats are primarily progressive liberal. They want silver or a bimetallic standard where both silver and gold are used. At the Democrat convention in Chicago, there are not enough votes for anybody to get the nomination. They go through 5 rounds of voting. By round number 4, the conservative Democrats got so angry at what was going on, they refused to vote anymore and they kind of walked out of the convention, resulting in the liberal progressive Democrats actually being able to win. And their choice for a nominee is this man, Nebraska Congressman William Jennings Bryan. Now, one of the things you may notice by looking at this picture is that Bryan looks fairly normal. Like he could sort of fit into modern day life. We're at that point where it's a big transition in from the 19th century and the people dressed that way into the 20th century into some of more modern standards and stylings. William Jennings Bryan was a congressman from Nebraska. He was only 36 years old. And if you remember, the actual minimum running age for president is 35. Bryan is the youngest man ever to run for president. He was literally a nobody from Nebraska. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody cared who he was. What he was, however, was an incredibly gifted speaker. His superpower was his public speaking ability. Bryan absolutely lost the first 3 rounds of voting, but nobody was able to win. And so in between each round, Bryan would go around and talk to people and sort of sell his ideas. And it really got to the point where people began to look at him and say, this guy's really good. I love what he has to say. He's got it all down. He's got a charisma to him. So by round number 5, with the exit of the conservative Democrats, William Jennings Bryan gets enough votes to secure the Democratic nomination. And he gives, as an acceptance speech, one of the most famous oratories in American history, something that school kids were actually forced to memorize for decades after this. It is known as the Cross of Gold speech, which we read and were discussing in class. The Cross of Gold speech is, in a sort of paraphrase, or to give you a summary of it, the Cross of Gold speech compares the poor, the workers, the farmers as a group to Christ, and that bankers, businessmen, industrialists, and entrepreneurs are like the Romans, and that they are crucifying America on a cross of gold in order to keep the power. A lot of people were really offended by it, but Bryan, it was an incredible speech and incredibly convincing. The election. So you have the relatively normal looking William Jennings Bryan against the guy who looks like he was cast as Nosferatu, William McKinley. And yes, Sam the Eagle from the Muppets is William McKinley. He was the basis for the Muppet character. Notice the unibrow, the proboscis, the glare, the little tufts of hair on the side of the head, the steely eyes. Same thing here. So McKinley and the Republicans are supported by an alliance of businesses, industrial entrepreneurs, skilled workers, and upper middle class farmers. Anybody who benefits from strong money, from money backed by gold. The Republicans campaigned on gold and tariffs. The entire campaign was run by Mark Hanna. And as we'll talk a little bit about in a moment, the election of 1896 is really the first modern election. It really runs itself the same way that modern elections do. One example of this, the Republicans outspent the Democrats 5-1. If you look at modern elections, the party that spends the most money on campaigning and advertising generally is the party that wins. Now, another thing that was really modern about this is that William Jennings Bryan went around the country giving speeches. Candidates generally didn't do that at the time. And it was really unusual that somebody would, but it proved really successful because that was Bryan's strong suit, was his ability to talk and to get people to listen to him. And Bryan's speeches really appealed to groups of unskilled workers, the lower classes and the poor, the rural farmers and the Western settlers. And he focused on going back to those 4 states that kept shifting their votes all the time, the swing states. Now, if you wanted to hear William McKinley speak, you could. McKinley every week would have people come and they could sit on his lawn at his house in Ohio, and he would come out and give a speech to them. This is because Mrs. McKinley suffered from epilepsy, and William McKinley did not feel right about leaving his wife alone and going around to give speeches. So instead, he just had people come to him. And Mark Hanna really used this to McKinley's advantage because what he basically did was he put it out there that the way that William McKinley cares for his sick wife is the way that William McKinley will care for the sick country of America. The Republicans portrayed William Jennings Bryan as a dangerous firebrand who was going to destroy America. The Democrats portray William McKinley as a puppet of Mark Hanna, who's basically just going to do whatever Mark Hanna says. What really ends up deciding the election is Bryan's inability to talk about anything other than the gold and silver issue. And when the Republicans begin hammering him on the question of tariffs and foreign relations, Bryan really has no answer for them. I mean, he's from Nebraska. His version of a foreign relation is going into Kansas. Now, in the end, there's William McKinley and Sam the Eagle together. McKinley easily wins the election. Okay. The Republicans raised money on a business plan. They would go to companies and say, look, you want to succeed. We want you to succeed. William McKinley wants you to succeed. William Jennings Bryan wants to destroy America. How about ponying up some money for William McKinley? This worked really well. Rather than playing on McKinley's strengths as a candidate, they targeted Bryan's weakness as a candidate. The Democrats attempted to target McKinley's weakness, which was he basically was doing what he was told by Mark Hanna. Both sides began using the media to attempt to instill fear in other people. McKinley easily won. He won by over 600,000 popular votes and got 95 electoral votes more, and was sworn in as the 25th president of the United States. Now, this is where we're going to sort of leave off. McKinley's inaugural address in March of 1897 promised America prosperity, a return to wealth and success, and that we would stay out of foreign affairs. Now, why did he bring this up? Because by this point in time, the revolution in Cuba had begun to heat up a lot, and McKinley really foresaw a time in the very near future that we would need to go in and do something. But it would not be because we were intervening in somebody else's war. It would not be because we're trying to gain territory. It would be because we need to defend ourselves. And how that comes about is the next story that we're going to be tackling. Okay, peace and love.